Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Overcoming Codependency, a journey to self-love and healthy relationships. I'm your host, Andy Anderson, co-founder of Avaya. Thank you so much for joining us for this spectacular event. We are talking with visionaries, doctors, authors, psychologists, and more, and they are sharing with us about codependency. What is codependency? What isn't codependency? And how can we become aware of our codependent tendencies and behaviors to overcome them and have really amazing, healthy, loving relationships? And today our guest is going to talk about transforming codependency. Please welcome Valerie Mason-John. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you, and I want to tell everyone a little bit about you before we dive in. So Valerie is an inspirational speaker and master trainer in the field of conflict transformation, leadership, and mindfulness. She is the award-winning author of 8 books and is the co-founder of 8-Step Recovery, which uses the Buddha's teachings to overcome addiction, an alternative to the 12 Steps program for addiction. And since the publication of that book, it has won Best USA Book Awards 2014 and Best International Book Award 2015 in the self-motivational and self-help category. 8-step meetings are now taking place in the UK, in USA, Canada, Mexico, India, and Finland. And Valerie, among many, many other things, is also the co-creator of something called mindfulness-based addiction recovery. So given all of that, Valerie, could you just dive in and tell us what is codependency to you?
God, what is codependency? It's a big one, but I suppose what we could say it's an excessive emotional psychological reliance on a partner, and typically, normally, it's a reliance on somebody who's ill, who's got an addiction. I mean, it's amazing how people can choose somebody who's ill or sick. I mean, I remember, I never defined myself as codependent, but as I look back, I can see how codependent I was. And I can remember being in a nightclub and being really attracted to this particular person. And then it was like, oh my God, they look depressed. What am I doing? So it was like, I just knew, I think, in a way, what's interesting is that I knew how to connect at the wound. And in a way, actually, one of the ways that I transformed my codependency with my recent partner, who I've been with for 11 years, is that I connected at a place of joy, which was so different, completely different, connecting at a place of joy rather than connecting at the place of the wound.
Now, is that connecting at a place of joy for yourself and for him or her, or is it, what? So where is that connection, the connection to joy?
Well, that connection to joy was definitely about joy in myself, because actually I was experiencing more joy. I think one of the reasons why I was codependent is because I was depressed. I would never have defined myself as depressed, but I had a chronic eating disorder, and that's a form of depression. And letting go of that eating disorder, I just became happier. I became happier within myself. I liked myself more. I mean, in a way, people with codependency have a very fraught relationship with the self, which is why we invest in somebody else. That's so much easier. Let's take the focus of ourselves and focus on somebody else. But there are a couple of stories that I do want to tell you. I mean,
Yes.
I had the first story is that I think it was in my late 20s, and I was in relationship with a partner. And my partner said, "This is the job. This is the job that's perfect for me." And so, it's like, well, have you applied for the job? And I put this pressure: have you applied? And oh yes, I've applied. And then at some point, I can't understand why I never got an interview. And so I took it upon myself to ring up the agency where my partner had applied for a job. And you know what? They'd never applied.
Oh.
They had never. And then it was like, it was interesting how it was turned on to me, because it was my fault and my mother's fault. But that was really interesting, just how I wanted to take care of their needs. And then the big wake up call that I had and I had in my early 30s, late 20s, was I suddenly realized that all these people were benefiting from my wisdom, were benefiting, from the things that I would tell them, and they were getting better, and I was staying sick. I was like, and it just one day just really struck me. I mean, I had a friend who said to me about 6 months ago, I really thank you. We were at university together, and she said, I really thank you, because she said, because of what you said, I never became bulimic. And I just thought, oh my God, really? And yet that was at university. And how many more years did I stay bulimic and anorectic?
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Mm-hmm.
codependency keeps us sick, and
Mm-hmm.
it keeps us unhappy.
So what are some of the things that you did, or did you follow any guidelines, or like how did you recover in this codependent addiction? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, it's a process, isn't it? It really is a process, and more, I want to throw out, pure abstinence, because what is pure abstinence? It's not perfection, it's progression. And actually, it was a long, steady journey. And that journey initially was the one of self-love. It really began with me because I just had such a self-hatred relationship with myself. In fact, I can remember a lover once saying to me, "You look at me as if you hate me." And actually, it was I didn't hate them, but it was because I hated myself, and that was what I was, part of that projection that that I was putting onto this person. And also as well, that I didn't think that I deserved love. I mean, the thing is, the thing is, Ande, have I pronounced your name correctly?
It's Andy, but you were
Oh,
close.
Andy, Ande, Andy.
I like it. It's kind of got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, yeah. The, you know, the thing is, what I was going to say is Andy, is that when we don't love ourselves, we are going to love others neurotically. There is that saying, if you don't love yourself, you can't love others. And that's a lie, because as codependents, we do love others, but we love others through the way we love ourselves, which is why it's such a neurotic relationship that we have with these people, and in a way, we're trying to mend ourselves through another person, because it's so painful to turn towards ourselves, and that's where it begins with all recovery. It really begins with ourselves. I mean, let's face it, when we go on a plane and those poor air hostesses have to do have to do their little dance routine, and they tell you about the mask, who do they tell to put the mask on first?
Your own.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're no use really to anybody if we're trying to put it on somebody first.
Right.
And so basically, it was really learning to like myself and love myself, and that was a journey. It was a journey, a mindfulness journey. Part of that mindfulness journey was doing a practice of loving kindness. And what I did, because I had so much self-hatred, I really hated myself. It was my little mantra: I hate myself, I hate myself. But I would say, I hate myself, even faster than that, And I realized that actually, when I started getting recovery and working with other people and just seeing how traumatic it is to have a relationship with ourselves because of the wounding that we've had in childhood. I mean, it's not like we're born with self-hatred. We're not born with this. Something happens in our childhood where we've turned away from ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing just how difficult, this practice of loving kindness, it has 5 stages. It has ourselves, it has a friend, it has somebody neutral, and an enemy, and which is an enemy of the mind. And often you hear people say, oh, well, I can give loving kindness to everybody else, but myself. I'm realizing actually there needed to be a practice to unpack this. And so I developed a practice called the 4 basic needs of the heart. These basic needs aren't my needs. There are books called 4 basic needs of the heart. But I developed a meditation around this where you have to give yourself attention, you have to give yourself affection, you have to give yourself appreciation, and you have to give yourself acceptance. Because when we're able to give ourselves these qualities, we will then be able to allow something different to come into being. We won't need to project all of this onto somebody else, because that's what we're doing with all the attention and the affection and the appreciation and acceptance that we need for ourselves. We're giving it to somebody else, and then we get resentful because it's not being returned back. You know, we get resentful because nobody is giving it to us, and we become this empty vacuum. We become dry, we become rigid, we become bitter, we become twisted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad that you're diving into projection. That's not something I've talked about a lot with people on this event. So for people who don't understand what that term is, can you just give a basic overview of how we can project our own self-hatred, let's say it, or lack of self-love onto somebody else?
Yeah, projection. Thank you for asking me to unpack this. You know, one of the ways, especially as a codependent, that we can project is we can project onto that other person saying, you need to get better, or you need love, but actually we're the ones who need it. They might not even need it, you know, but actually we're projecting our needs onto somebody else, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is how projection works. It's like it's something that we really want, but we put it onto somebody else. So it was a bit like I was in a meeting today, and you know, there were 4 of us, and it was like, who was going to go next? And then a friend said, do you want to go next? And I said, well, are you projecting onto me? Are you saying you want to go next? Or, you know, are you really asking me, you know? So this thing of that often something that we need, that we want, we put it onto somebody else. Often we can buy people presents, but we actually want it. you
Right.
know we buy somebody this present and make this big deal of getting this present for somebody, but actually it's something that we want for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can project those negative, you know, definitely we can project things that we don't like about ourselves. We project those negative things onto other people, and this is the thing with codependency. This is why it goes wrong, because it's okay when somebody is accepting all that love, all that attention and care we're giving them. But as soon as we get triggered and they trigger us, we then project all the negative stuff onto them as well, which, you know, which
Mm-hmm.
causes us to suffer.
I love it. Thank you so much for unpacking that. I think that's a very important topic that I don't think, you know, a lot of people aren't aware of, this thing called projection, and how if we're not loving ourselves, or we're, you know, not happy with our life, or, you know, how we're in our relationship, then yes, we take that, we put it on somebody else. And oftentimes we don't realize or aren't aware that, oh, wait a second, this is my self-hatred. This is my, you know, resentment and all that kind of stuff for not living my own life. So I think it's really important. Another thing that I'd love to dive into is really the difference between being compassionate towards your partner and, you know, being codependent. You know, obviously you could be a caretaker, you can help, let's say your partner's sick on the random occasion, not all the time, right, or whatever, and you're helping them. What's the difference? You know, if someone's codependent, just like you said, you were always attracted to the sick the sick person, you know, that kind of person. So how do you know the difference if someone's struggling with that?
Well, compassion is unconditional. You know, when we're truly compassionate, we're not expecting anything back. That's real compassion and real kindness in action. It's like we do something, there's no residue, there's no resentment, there's no nothing. You know, with codependency, we are expecting something back. It's like, okay, well, if I take care of you, maybe you'll take care of me. If I do this, you will do this for me. And it's not actually spoken, which is why we can get really resentful. And actually, we're looking, the problem is with codependency, we're often looking for something in somebody and we never get it, which is why we get addicted to these people, because there is an attraction. It's familiar. It's often familiar because, in our childhood, we learned to have these dysfunctional relationships. We didn't get something and we're looking for it. We're looking for it desperately in this other relationship, and we don't get it. And we get bitter and we get twisted. Whereas when we're being compassionate, we move on. We give, we're able to give, and we're not expecting anything back. But the only way we can be compassionate is when we learn to be compassionate to ourselves. When we can be compassionate to ourselves, we're not going to be expecting anything back from other people. So again, it has to begin with ourselves. So the difference is, when somebody is being compassionate to somebody, that means that they have a good, healthy relationship with the self. And they're able to let go of the self. But the codependent person doesn't have a good relationship with the self and is unable to let go of the self.
So that, that really goes into a whole other topic in the world of diving down the rabbit hole, right? You're talking about someone being able to give up the self, right? So can you just, let's dive into that for a second. So what is this all about, and how does this help someone like who's codependent?
Well, giving up the self, or just really, in a way, for me, in layman's language, of giving up the self is really giving up these old stories that we've held on to, these stories that we hold on for 10, 50, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Sometimes, when I'm training, with people and facilitating, I say, do you want to take this to your grave? How long do you want to take this identity with you? How long are you going to hold on to this story? This story of what happened in childhood and what you didn't get. So in a way, part of the recovery of codependency is, firstly, we have to cultivate a healthy self. You have to, because, before you can begin to let go of the self, before you can begin to let go of these identities, these stories that keep us trapped in dysfunctional relationships, we have to cultivate some healthiness. And then we can begin to let go, because we can begin to see, well, that was the past. I don't need to do this anymore. I can choose something different. You can see that you're actually holding on to an old story. So again, letting go of the self is letting go of these identities that we carry around for so long. And also that means letting go of the identity, I'm a codependent.
Right. There you go.
At some point we have to let go of it. We have to see through it. And that doesn't mean to say that, we're healed and we're never going to have any codependent relationships again, because, people like Adi Shanti says, once you think you've got it, you've lost it. So it's not like, oh, yes, I can relax, because, we do have to be vigilant. But the thing is that what will happen is that these relationships that have drawn us like a magnet, and we have to remember that if these relationships draw us like a magnet, it's showing us that there's a part of ourself that is unresolved. It's showing us that there's a part of ourself that we need to come to peace with. And we're trying to come to peace with it in somebody else. Sometimes, people in codependent relationships, when they have that light bulb moment, they think, well, I'm always choosing these people who are sick, who've got addictions, who are ill, etc., etc. But actually, when I got to that point, when I'm always choosing people who are sick, you know, I'm choosing somebody who's an alcoholic, you know, somebody who's got depression. But what did I have? I had an eating disorder. I had depression, you know, so I was just choosing somebody who mirrored my sickness just in a different way. I just didn't have to deal with it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I was holding on to an aspect of myself because it was so hard to let go of this sick part of myself.
Mm. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's a, you know, an amazing way to look at this. You know, we get all these different ways and all these different speakers talking about this topic and tackling it in different ways. And that's totally beautiful. And it makes me, you know, be continuously reminded of self-responsibility, right? It really is this journey of, okay, so, you know, a lot of codependents attract narcissists, right? This is a commonality in talking about this topic. So, okay, if that is you, anyone who's watching right now, then how is it that you are, right? That person is mirroring something in you that's just showing up in a different form. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and actually it's interesting you mentioned narcissists because narcissists also have an unhealthy relationship with self.
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
know, they're trying to boost themselves and build a self, and it's all about them, and it's they can't see, they're so separate, they can't see anybody else. It's become all about them, and they have an unhealthy relationship with self. And there is also that thing which is which I think narcissists and codependents have in common, is this aspect of denial and shame.
Mm-hmm. Right. So therein lies the mirroring for each other. There it is. So what about mindfulness? I know this is something that you talk about a lot in your work. How does practicing mindfulness help with codependency recovery?
Wow, gosh, that is such a big question, Andy, but I like calling you Onde too.
Hey,
They,
I like it too. You can say that.
wow, you know, it's such a big question. But what I would initially say is that somebody who is codependent, then that's a big signal to tell me that the central nervous system is out of whack, it's out of balance. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a way, what we're trying to do, and that's the kind of healthy or positive part, that we you know, codependents are trying to take care of themselves, but you know, I suppose what you call it, vicariously, or you know, but just really trying to take care of themselves in somebody else. They, you know, they really do want to take care of the wounding, but because the central nervous system is so out of whack, it has to be, because they're unable to come in relationship with themselves, which is why it's so difficult to recover. And this is one of the most important things about mindfulness. Mindfulness calms the central nervous system. Okay, so if you think like falling in love, you know, when we fall in love, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, all our habitual behaviors go into the background, because when we fall in love, it's, you know, the dopamine is released and the central nervous system is calmed, but it's short-lived. But a mindfulness practice which is steady, which is systematic, which is accumulative, begins to calm and heal the central nervous system and bring the central nervous system back into balance. And
Mm-hmm.
when the central nervous system is more in balance, we can begin to have a healthier relationship with ourselves. Simple.
I love it. Yeah, mindfulness. So do you have specific mindfulness practices that you recommend or practice yourself?
Yes. Well, the four basic needs is a practice. That's a practice. A great one, which is called the breathing space, which is a backbone of mindfulness practices, where one becomes aware of the body. Yeah, which is very hard. You know, how many of us like to be aware of the body? And you know, if we're living our life through somebody else, we're not aware of our body. we're aware of somebody else. But, so this practice of the breathing space, of becoming aware of the body, aware of feelings, aware of thoughts, and just allowing. I mean, even this, if somebody can allow the touch of breathing to calm or to soothe, rather than calm, to soothe the heart mind, to soothe the thoughts, to soothe the body. Because this is what we're doing. Those of us who have been wounded and had dysfunctional childhoods, had trauma in childhood, we're trying to soothe ourselves, which is why we can go into codependent relationships or pick up a drug or a substance or a compulsive behavior. We're basically trying to soothe ourselves. And we have to learn to soothe ourselves in a more healthier way. And one of the ways we can learn to soothe ourselves is just coming to contact with the touch of the breathing, perhaps in the abdomen. So we experience the touch of the breathing by the abdomen rising and falling. And I'm just experiencing that now. That the touch of the breathing can really soothe the heart mind. Or we may become in touch with the breathing in the chest area, rising and falling, and allowing the touch of the breathing to soothe thoughts, to soothe the heart mind. And if we're able to, is becoming aware of the touch of the breathing on the upper lip and inside the nostril. And again, this will help to soothe the heart mind, to soothe the central nervous system. So that's why we often say, just stop and take a breath.
I'm already relaxed just just with that. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that there's a very large thunderstorm going on outside right now. So if anyone hears this, I'm not sure if my microphone's picking up, but it's crazy out there. So if you're wondering what those noises are, that's what it is.
Oh, well, thank you. And that's great. That calms the central nervous system by just turning towards what is happening in our experience rather than trying to push it out. So you just modeled something. There's another great exercise, and I say to people, when they come back to me, I'm still agitated. I said, well, have you tried what I've said? And they said, oh no. I said, well, when you've tried and you've done it several times, let me know. So there were two very simple things. And somebody taught me this years ago, because I was a smoker up until, I had a short-lived smoking life, 18 to 25. And smoking is about soothing ourselves. We pick up a cigarette when we're stressed and something's happened. We pick up a cigarette to soothe ourselves. And I say to people, you could pick up a pen or just do this. Just do it yourself and see what happens.
Right.
See
just
how
the
soothing?
breathing.
Yeah. And it's just the breathing that soothes us. It just puts us in a different place. Another way to soothe ourselves, because sometimes that can be too much for somebody. I say to somebody, just lift your head up and look at the sky or look at the ceiling and bring it back down again. And it just puts us into a different mental state. So there are these mindfulness actions that we can do to help soothe ourselves. So it's taking up a practice. So even if you took up one of these practices that I've mentioned, would be the beginning of transforming codependency.
I love it. Thank you. I want to ask you before we wrap up, because we're running a little low on time here. I want to ask you about control and see if you go into that for a minute. So control, manipulation, those are both common characteristics of people who have codependency. So could you just talk a little bit about do you have any suggestions for how we can let go of control, right? Surrender control. Another gigantic question.
Well, the thing is that at the end of the day, we're not really in control, are we?
We certainly aren't.
This is the thing that we really want to control things. I mean, it's interesting because I think there is that person who has the eating disorder is quite narcissistic, and what they control is the body. I think that's, you know, when things get out of control, this is the thing that we can control. We can control the body. But, you know, in the end, I think it's actually realizing that we're just not in control. I think actually just realizing that we cannot control what is going to happen. We think we can, but we can't. And the awareness that everything is changing, you know, we're changing. This body is changing moment by moment, you know. The person who we're trying to control is changing. They don't stay static. They might think they are static, but they're changing moment by moment. So there is nothing to control, you know, in lay people's language. You know, what does that mean? I mean, it's, again, it's all coming back to that anchor of learning to love and like ourselves, because when we learn to love ourselves, we accept ourselves. So we let go of control, because we just love what is and what is there. You see, the thing is that, Andy, you ask me these questions, but we cannot avoid loving ourselves and liking ourselves if we really want to get well. At the backbone of all these questions, it really does come to cultivating a positive, healthy self. So, you know, we could say that the practice of mindfulness is the study of the self. That's the practice of mindfulness. We learn to get to know the selves. But then, once we've learned to get to know the self, we have to let go of it, you know? Mm-hmm. So, but it's really important. We don't get to know ourselves when we're in somebody else's story, we're in somebody else's malaise. We don't. We really have to turn towards our painful experience, and that's hard. We have to learn to be with discomfort. So in a way, how do we work with control is surrender, is to surrender to our direct experience. Because guarantee that what, if we look for the trigger that gets us into somebody else's business, that gets us into somebody else's life, if we really look for the trigger, the core trigger is going to be in the discomfort and the painful experience in our own lives.
That's good. Right. So everybody watching right now, if the next time you feel that grip of control come over you, or trying to control your partner or life or yourself or whatever, then yeah, take a look at what is it that's happening inside you in that moment that triggered that
exactly
control.
Yeah. Or ask, what am I moving away from? What am I moving away from? What's going on for me? And it's like, maybe you feel sad, turn towards that. I'm sad. Give yourself a hug, you know. I'm experiencing vulnerability, you know, and that's okay, because actually some of us were taught not that it wasn't a positive thing to experience sadness. It wasn't a positive thing to experience vulnerability. Some of us were taught not to feel, and we have to learn to feel again. Feel healthily, because what we're doing is we're feeling and experiencing through somebody else's trauma.
I love it. Thank you. That was a beautiful answer. I appreciate you diving into that control topic. So thank you for being here and doing this and sharing all your insights and love and wisdom. And I just have loved it. So do you have any last insights that you want to leave everybody with before we hop off?
I suppose the last and the first insight is, when we help ourselves, we help others. When we help others, we help ourselves. We're not separate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into this really extraordinary interview with Valerie. And here is to our collective journey to self-love and healthy relationships. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. I just got off another incredible interview with Valerie Mason-John. I so love this interview. And she talked a lot about loving ourselves. So many of these interviews have come back to this thing called loving ourselves, right? If we can't love ourselves, if we can't develop a healthy, loving, compassionate relationship to ourselves, it's really hard to have amazing, healthy, loving relationships with others. So let's love ourselves. Remind yourself to love yourself. Remind yourself of how awesome you are. And another thing that Valerie talked a lot about was mindfulness. This is something she talks a lot about in her work. And one of the things I loved about all the different practices she took us through is that it all really comes back to the breath. It comes back to the breath. It comes back to just taking a moment and slowing down and focusing our attention, focusing our energy on that breath, focusing our energy on breathing in and breathing out. Or like she said, focusing our energy on just looking up at the ceiling, right? Shifting your attention to something else. So mindfulness practices and how helpful that is in codependency recovery. All right, everybody, I just wanted to give you that quick wrap up, and I will see you again on the next interview. And thanks again so much for tuning in.